It all started when I moved into what seemed like a peaceful neighborhood, quiet streets, smiling neighbors, and of course the ever-watchful eyes of the HOA. I figured keeping my head down and being a good neighbor would be enough. But apparently, not joining the HOA was seen as some kind of crime. At first, it was small stuff, passive-aggressive notes on my door, warnings about non-compliance for things like my mailbox paint. I brushed it off, but then things got serious. One morning, I stepped outside and saw smoke rising from my driveway. My heart sank. My police-issued motorcycle, something I'd spent years earning through training and service, was torched. The only thing left was a twisted, blackened frame. No witnesses, no apology. Just a smug HOA rep claiming it was probably an accident. That's when I knew this wasn't just about a disagreement, it was personal. What they didn't know was who I really am. See, most people around here just know me as the quiet guy who works in law enforcement. They didn't know I'm actually the county sheriff. I never brag about my position, and I never expected to use it like this. But after what they did, I had no choice. So I started looking deeper, into their rules, their finances, even their so-called security patrol. And what I found? Let's just say, things are about to get very uncomfortable for the HOA board. You won't believe what happens next. At first, I told myself maybe I was overreacting. Maybe someone just made a mistake. But deep down, I knew better. I'd seen enough in my career to recognize when something didn't add up. So I started digging, not as a sheriff, but as a neighbor who deserved answers. I looked into HOA records, board meeting notes, even talked to a few residents who'd quietly moved out without saying much. Turns out, I wasn't the only one who'd been pushed around. People had been fined for ridiculous things, garden gnomes, the color of a front door, even for parking in their own driveway overnight. The deeper I looked, the stranger things got. The same names kept popping up, on complaints, fines, and even on HOA contracts. One of them, the head of the board, was linked to a private company doing property inspections around the neighborhood. It felt like a setup. And the kicker? None of them knew I had full access to county property records and law enforcement databases. They thought I was just another homeowner. That worked to my advantage. I started documenting everything: photos, conversations, patterns of behavior. The way they handled complaints, how quickly they dismissed anyone who pushed back. And through it all, they kept smiling in public, pretending nothing was wrong. But behind the scenes, something shady was going on. And still, no one had given me a straight answer about who burned my bike, but I was getting closer. And what I found next changed everything. The deeper I went, the more twisted it all became. I found out the HOA president, Carl, wasn't just running the board. He was also the owner of the inspection company they'd hired. Every violation led back to his business, and every fine padded his pocket. Neighbors had been quietly paying hundreds, sometimes thousands, in bogus fees just to avoid being harassed or taken to court. Most people just gave up and moved out, and now I understood why no one ever stayed here long. One of my neighbors, a retired school teacher named Linda, finally opened up to me. She'd been fined for a non-regulation bird feeder and had her yard torn up after refusing to pay. When she tried to challenge the board, her tires were slashed, and her security cameras were mysteriously disabled. She never called the police because, as she put it, they run everything around here. That hit hard. People were scared of the very people supposed to keep the neighborhood safe and organized. I started noticing a pattern. Most of the people who got targeted didn't fit the HOA's ideal image. They were either renters, single parents, retirees, or, like me, folks who refused to join the association. That's when it clicked. This wasn't just about power or money. It was control. And the moment I didn't fall in line, they made an example out of me. But what I still didn't realize was that I wasn't just investigating anymore. I was building a case. And soon everything they'd buried was going to come to light. It all started to spiral faster than I expected. The more I uncovered, the more the HOA board seemed to double down. I caught a man, one of Carl's so-called inspectors, snooping around my property late at night. When I confronted him, he claimed he was just checking for violations. At midnight, no clipboard, no ID. I recorded the whole thing. Still, I didn't confront the board directly. Not yet. I needed more. I needed undeniable proof. That's when I set up hidden cameras around my place. I also started wearing a body cam during casual conversations, especially during HOA meetings. They still had no clue I was the county sheriff. They just assumed I was another guy getting fed up. But behind the scenes, I was working with a small team of trusted deputies, feeding them everything I found. We started cross-checking financial records, HOA payments, and business filings. And it wasn't just shady, it was criminal. Money was being funneled through multiple shell companies. Fines collected from residents were being rerouted, and some funds, meant for neighborhood improvements, had flat out disappeared. Meanwhile, Carl and his close buddies were living large, throwing private events, taking vacations, and posting about their successful community leadership. But the neighborhood was falling apart: cracked sidewalks, flickering streetlights, broken playground equipment. It was a front. A scam built on fear and silence. Then came the final straw. I got a letter slipped under my door with no name, just a warning: stop asking questions. We know who you are. That's when I knew things were about to explode. I stared at that note for a long time. No signature, no fingerprints, just that one sentence that told me everything. They finally knew. And that meant the clock was ticking. Up until now, I'd been playing it safe, staying in the shadows. But this was a threat, and not just to me. If they were willing to torch my bike and stalk my home, what else were they capable of? I doubled security around my property and warned Linda and a few others to keep an eye out. But then, just when I thought I had the full picture, something new surfaced, something I hadn't expected. A deputy from a neighboring district called me after noticing my name attached to an old HOA filing. Apparently, years ago, this same board, or at least some of the members, had been involved in a different HOA scandal. Another neighborhood, different county, same tactics. Fake violations, harassment, embezzlement. The case went cold after the key witness disappeared. No charges were ever filed. The twist? Carl had changed his name 2 years before showing up here. That was the piece I didn't see coming. This wasn't just some neighborhood board with too much power. It was a system, a setup. They'd done this before, possibly more than once, and just kept moving when things got too hot. This wasn't about enforcing HOA rules. It was a business model built on fear. Now I knew exactly what I was dealing with, but they didn't know what was coming next. I knew I had to move fast. With Carl's real identity exposed and a history of shady HOA takeovers trailing behind him, I had enough to go public. But instead of going straight to court, I did something a little more personal. I called a special HOA meeting, said I had important security concerns to share. The room was packed. Board members, neighbors, even a few folks who had kept their heads down for months. I could feel the tension as Carl tried to maintain his usual smug calm, but his eyes darted around the room. He knew. I stood up, played the footage. Unauthorized inspections, threats, payments being funneled to shell companies. I laid out everything. The fake business filings, the name change, the previous HOA scandal. People were shocked. Some looked angry, others embarrassed they hadn't spoken up sooner. But the real kicker came when I finally showed my badge. Dead silence. "I'm the county sheriff," I said, "and everything you just saw, it's part of an active investigation." Before Carl could even stand up, deputies entered the room and took him and 2 board members into custody. The rest of the board resigned on the spot. For the first time in a long while, the neighborhood felt still, safe. But just as things began to settle, I got a call from the neighboring county. Turns out, Carl wasn't working alone. Another HOA, another setup, same blueprint. Someone else had picked up right where he left off, and this time they already knew my name. After everything, the neighborhood finally had a chance to breathe. People started talking to each other again, not just about the scandal, but about rebuilding trust. The HOA was restructured with new leadership voted in by the residents. This time, everything was transparent. The shady contracts were cancelled, the fake violations were wiped clean, and folks like Linda finally got the peace they deserved. We held a community cleanup day, something small, but it felt like the start of real change. As for Carl, he's facing multiple charges across several counties now. The investigation into the wider scam is ongoing, and with new witnesses coming forward, more arrests are likely. It turns out they've been pulling the same HOA scam for nearly a decade, just hopping from one community to the next. What started as a fight over a burned police bike turned into something way bigger than I ever expected.